This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Same show, just 20 to 25% cozier. Here's what we got for y'all. Tonight, they've been on the front lines on the fight against COVID-19, and now they're finally seeing the light at the end of this dark tunnel. We dive into the vaccine rollout for frontline workers. Then, when the curtains come up again, what will movie theaters look like? With studios turning to streaming, we explore what the future might hold for a night at the movies and the industry behind it. But first, here's what you need to know right now. Get the easy stuff done now and push the rest for later. That's the mentality on Capitol Hill as Democrats in the House and Republicans in the Senate say they're finally nearing a new deal for economic relief in the pandemic.
We committed to continuing these urgent discussions until we have an agreement. And we agreed we will not leave town until we've made law.
It's a $900 billion deal in talks today, which would include a new round of stimulus checks for citizens. Notably, the deal wouldn't include aid for state and local governments, which is on the Democrats' wish list. It also wouldn't include a measure protecting companies from COVID-related lawsuits, as Republicans want. Again, that's the stuff both sides don't see eye to eye on. And while the basic relief package could be passed this week, some of those other provisions could get pushed weeks down the line or not happen at all. This relief deal might get tied in with another big pressing issue, a $1.4 trillion spending bill Congress will have to pass by Friday to avert a government shutdown or some other stopgap. This is your regular reminder that it ain't the vaccine fairy dropping off those doses. The vaccine rollout in the US is limited by how many shots the federal government is able to get from Pfizer and any other manufacturers in the mix. The Trump administration has been catching some flack for only ordering 100 million Pfizer vaccines, which is only enough to vaccinate 50 million people since 2 doses are required. Another 50 million doses ordered from Moderna will only go so far to fill in the gaps. So now the federal government is again negotiating with Pfizer for tens of millions of more doses, something Pfizer said could be difficult to supply since it's already gotten orders from so many other countries. The deal could hinge on the US government freeing up supplies to actually help Pfizer produce those additional vaccines. A new kind of COVID test could make the process easier than ever.
The FDA issued an emergency use authorization for the first fully at-home diagnostic test for COVID-19 that does not require a prescription.
This new at-home test is from Australian company Ellume, and unlike many other at-home tests rolled out previously, it doesn't require samples to be sent to a lab. Experts say we're now basically at the point of this pandemic where technological efforts around testing that started way back in the spring are finally coming to fruition, which will likely mean much more abundant and convenient COVID testing available to the public in the coming months. So just when you thought you had a reason to leave the house, nope, you can get that test done from your couch too. This week, we've seen the first doses of the coronavirus vaccine go to healthcare workers across the US. And in many places, it was a publicized event with folks cheering for the inoculations. It's an exciting time that's kind of tempered by the fact that more than 300,000 people have died in the US because of the virus. Newsy's Lindsay Thies profiled one healthcare worker on their experience getting the vaccine and what comes next.
So you guys ready?
As hospitals across the country roll out their vaccinations of frontline healthcare staff, it's a glimpse of what's to come for all of us in the months ahead.
COVID-19 is a horrible thing. It's taken a lot of lives that we have witnessed. And I think it's important that people understand that getting vaccinations will help you.
At Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center in Denver, a team of 30 decided who would be the first among their staff to get the vaccine. The hospital expects to go through 975 doses in 4 days.
This is not just, doctors and RNs in the ICU.
Absolutely. It takes a whole group. We have people that, help clean our rooms. We have people that deliver food. Everybody that comes in contact, respiratory therapists, pharmacy folks.
ER Intake Secretary Joyce Jones was the first to roll up her sleeve after she was deemed most at risk.
I'm the first person they see when they come in. That's why.
Her reason for saying yes to the shot? her family.
They mean the world to me. It's my husband who's been with me for over 40 years, and my kids, and my grandson, and my granddaughter. I don't want them to get sick. I don't want them to go through things I've seen.
Altogether, today, Presbyterian St. Luke's plans to vaccinate about 300 members of their medical staff, and the vibe has been nothing but joy. I've even seen a few feel-good tears.
Are you getting yours today?
The vaccine process is proof of lots of planning. Every 15 minutes, 5 people arrive to get their shot. Each person goes through a brief check-in where they get asked about allergies and fill out their follow-up card. At the same time, an infectious disease pharmacist preps the doses in the shots.
We're kind of working in tandem here. This gentleman to my right, he is diluting the vaccine once it has thawed, and once the vaccine is diluted, and then I am drawing up the doses here to be administered.
After the shot goes in,
So we are going to watch you for about 15 minutes.
the vaccinated staff wait for 15 minutes in freshly sanitized chairs. It's in case there's a sudden bad allergic reaction, which has been known to happen, albeit very rarely. They'll wait another 24 to 48 hours before returning to work.
Oh yeah, I feel good.
It's a well-oiled machine, one that will be churning for several hours each day in the coming months. Lindsay Thies, Newsy, Denver.
I'm going to use this break to practice pronouncing this name. There's something to be said about long-term investments in talent. I just hope this first story gives my bosses an idea or two. Here's what's trending. The NBA's Giannis Antetokounmpo signed a new 5-year, $228 million Supermax contract with the Milwaukee Bucks, the largest contract in NBA history. If you haven't been keeping up, Giannis been ballin'. He's a 2-time league MVP and last season became the 3rd player in NBA history to get MVP and Defensive Player of the Year in the same season. And the Bucks have gotten better almost every season since he's been on the roster, so $228 million sounds like a pretty good investment. This contract isn't just a big deal because it's history-making. According to Axios, it's one of many that have pushed the active number of NBA contracts with an average annual value of more than $20 million to 60, the most of any major North American sports league. Antetokounmpo said on Twitter, "I'm blessed to be a part of the Milwaukee Bucks for the next 5 years. Let's make these years count." Tom Cruise is really passionate about social distancing, a man after Fauci's own heart. Unlike Fauci, Cruise has a colorful outburst about this pandemic passion making its rounds on social media. According to British tabloid paper The Sun, Cruise yelled at 2 masked employees on the set of Mission Impossible 7 for being less than a meter apart from each other. I would say that's too close, but I'm really not great at conversions. But the internet is split. Was he being a jerk or were points made? I mean, the film industry really has struggled during the pandemic. Countless films have pushed back releases or halted production altogether. Movie theaters are in jeopardy, and there's a human toll in all of this that Cruise actually referenced between expletives. Maybe next time he can just woosah. It's taken more than half a century, but the Negro League baseball players who were denied the opportunity to play in the majors are officially being called up. Major League Baseball said Wednesday they're adding 7 Negro Leagues that operated between 1920 and 1948 to the official MLB records, something the commissioner called long overdue recognition. The decision means that around 3,400 Negro League players will now be considered major leaguers. The Negro Leagues existed because black players with comparable talent weren't allowed to play with white players. That didn't happen until Jackie Robinson's arrival in the MLB in 1947. In its short-lived existence, the Negro Leagues produced 35 MLB Hall of Famers, including Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson. As a part of this decision, the MLB's official statistician will oversee the full scope of how this new designation could change the league's records and statistics. Our nation's jails and prisons were hit hard by the coronavirus this year. In many places, social distancing wasn't and isn't always possible, and hygiene products are limited. Because jails and prisons have been hotspots, some states have put inmates in the first phase of COVID vaccine distribution. As Newsy's Jamal Andrus reports, states are either prioritizing inmates or putting them at the very back of the line.
While healthcare workers and nursing home residents are universally first in line for COVID vaccinations, plans for inmates in America's prisons and jails vary from one extreme to the other.
Congregate care settings where individuals are closely together, we know are a documented risk factor. And from an equity perspective, where people are together and at risk in the same situation, we felt it was really important to prioritize that group.
There are 6 states putting inmates in the first phase of vaccine distribution, pointing to jails and prisons being COVID hotspots throughout the pandemic. So far, at least 1,600 prisoners and 108 prison employees in state and federal prisons have died from COVID complications. And just this week, new infections increased by 10%, reaching the highest level yet of positive cases for those behind bars.
It's a basic tenet of public health to try and stop outbreaks at their source. And in many of these rural communities, the source is the prison.
Dr. Eric Toner is a senior scientist at Johns Hopkins. He co-authored a vaccine distribution recommendation report to help states craft their own vaccination plans.
We absolutely need to vaccinate the people in the prison, whether they're staff or inmates, in order to protect everybody.
Dr. Toner's report, as well as reports from the National Academy of Medicine and the Council on Criminal Justice, have all recommended that prison staff and inmates be included in the first phase of the vaccination process.
We also have, both a legal and a moral obligation to provide health care to people that are incarcerated.
There's no way that prisoners are going to get it before members of the vulnerable population.
Despite medical recommendations, the Prison Policy Initiative counts 7 states that explicitly have corrections officers in their Phase 1 distribution plan, but exclude the inmates until later phases. In Chicago, 2 separate agencies are handling vaccine distribution at the local jail. The Cook County Health and Hospital System will be vaccinating inmates, and the Sheriff's Office will handle staff. While the staff are scheduled to be vaccinated during Phase 1, there's no definitive timetable for when inmates will receive a vaccination. Cook County Jail, one of the largest single-site jails in the country, currently has 400 active COVID cases. In an email to Newsy, Cook County Health said, quote, "We look forward to receiving sufficient supply to vaccinate our various populations, from our employees to our patients, including detainees, to the larger community," but hasn't responded to an email asking for further clarification.
In our view, prison staff and the prisoners themselves should be treated the same. They are exposed to the same risks. Prisons and jails are locations where there have been large outbreaks, and outbreaks in the jail tend to seed the community.
Jamal Andrews, Newsy, Chicago.
In 2020, even the mundane becomes a bit dramatic. We try not to be too repetitive on this show, but Joe Biden has won the 2020 presidential election. Full stop. Electors from all over the country cast their votes earlier this week, further solidifying his win. But because it's the 2020 presidential election, even the most technical and usually boring aspects of the political process turn into TNT-style drama. Newsy's Stephanie Liebergen tells us what to expect when Congress meets to count the Electoral College votes early next year.
The Electoral College votes have been cast, and the last step in determining the next president happens when Congress counts those votes on January 6th. At least one lawmaker already has plans to object. Representative Mo Brooks of Alabama says the election results in states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, and Wisconsin were rife with fraud.
Every one of them that I am convinced has an election system that is so defective and unreliable as to make them unworthy of trust in this presidential election.
His claims echo those made in dozens of lawsuits across the country, lawsuits that have repeatedly been dismissed.
If there's so much evidence out there of all of this widespread voting fraud, why are there so many judges dismissing the cases for lack of evidence?
Because the judicial system is not geared to handle election contests. The Supreme Court and federal judges are not the final jury, the final judge, or for that matter, the final arbiter. The final arbiter is the United States Congress.
During the joint session in January, lawmakers can object to a state's electoral college votes. That objection must be issued in writing and signed by one member of the House and one senator. A senator has yet to publicly support Brooks. But if that happens, both chambers would separate and spend 2 hours debating the objection before voting on whether or not to accept that state's results. The last time that happened was in 2005, when Democratic Representative Stephanie Tubbs Jones and Senator Barbara Boxer objected to President George W. Bush's victory in Ohio, citing irregularities. 4 years ago, Democrats tried to object to President Trump's win, but without a proper written objection signed by a lawmaker from each chamber, then Vice President Joe Biden gavelled down all those attempts.
Objection cannot be received.
Proper objections to electoral votes are rare. Federal law says state results are deemed conclusive as long as the final slate of electors is determined at least 6 days before the Electoral College meets. Now, that safe harbor deadline, which key battleground states appear to have met this year, is designed to protect states from exactly what Brooks plans to do.
You could certainly see some of his supporters in Congress try to raise challenges. It is a question, they're not going to pass. They're not going to succeed in undoing the electoral vote.
But for Brooks, neither the congressional count nor the failure to prove widespread voter fraud will be enough to call Biden's victory legitimate.
Will you recognize Joe Biden as the president-elect after Congress votes on January 6th?
If Joe Biden gets a majority of the votes of the Electoral College as submitted to Congress and recognized by Congress, yes, he will be the president-elect who did so through massive voter fraud and election theft.
Stephanie Liebergen, Newsy, Miami.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. Feedback is welcome, and I'm also willing to field requests from time to time, except for more hilarious promos of Christians sleeping at the office. Haven't we goofed off enough, y'all? The National Mall in DC is home to lots of memorials that honor the sacrifice of those who served our country. According to the National Park Service, there are more than 100 unique monuments and memorials across 1,000 acres of parkland. Now, a new memorial has been erected to highlight the contributions of a group of veterans that are often overlooked. National reporter Maya Rodriguez has more.
Almost all tribes use sacred fires and water, and they use the earth and the air.
To hear artist Harvey Pratt describe this place,
That's what I'll use, those elements.
is to understand how much it means to him and others.
And I thought about it, and I said, how do you connect 573 federally recognized tribes plus the state recognized tribes, without being specific to a certain tribe or a region?
That's the task Pratt faced in designing the newest memorial in Washington, D.C., the National Native American Veterans Memorial. Nestled by the National Mall beside the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, it is a place meant for reflection and remembrance.
Native people, tribal people, have always respected their veterans. Almost every tribe has a memorial to their veterans.
But there's never been a national one in such a prominent place until now. The Smithsonian's Rebecca Troutman is the memorial's curator.
We held 35 consultations across the country and met with about 1,200 people because we really wanted to get a sense of what they wanted to see in the memorial, what the experience of visiting it should be.
Congress first authorized its construction in 1994, but money needed to be raised to make it happen. A construction funded by private donations.
Native people have been serving in great numbers and with great dedication from the time of the Revolutionary War up to the present, and they continue to serve in large numbers.
People like Harvey Pratt, who is a Cheyenne Arapaho, a Cheyenne peace chief, and a veteran who served in Vietnam.
We're still here. Native people are still here. And when Native people come to the memorial and they do their ceremonies, that we're going to educate non-Native people, and they'll see us doing things, they'll ask questions about us, and they'll come to know us a little better.
Getting to know a group of American veterans who now have a place where their sacrifice is recognized. In Washington, I'm Maya Rodriguez.
Thousands of America's movie theaters have been in limbo since the pandemic first began. It's estimated 70% of theaters will have to shut down by the end of the year without federal funding. Now, some cinemas are trying new ways to prevent from going dark for good.
It's the holiday season, and one of America's favorite pastimes is going to the movies.
You can just sit down, have some popcorn, just eat some snacks. That's why watching movies in a theater is where it's at.
But with indoor viewing no longer an option for many theaters, the cinema industry is adjusting.
Shut down the box office early in the process. So all of our tickets are online. And then we also added a order in advance module to order your concessions or food.
Tim League is the chairman of Alamo Drafthouse Cinema. Prior to the pandemic, they employed about 5,500 people in 41 locations from New York to California. Though the number of employees is now around 500, League says there is a silver lining for having silver screens go black.
Although we have a smaller crew, we are using this time to reimagine the guest experience and to test some things out.
Alamo recently built a video-on-demand platform with online interaction, which has expanded its audience internationally.
We'll put on events and we'll have people joining us from London, from Czechoslovakia, from all over the place that have heard about the Alamo and wanted to experience it, but hadn't had an opportunity.
An opportunity to try new ways of watching movies and making money, all while following COVID safety guidelines.
Even if you're open, it's really difficult to stay profitable at this point.
Patrick Kokorin is with the National Association of Theater Owners. He says even with new options like private screenings and outdoor viewing, most of the country's theaters will go dark without government funding or new blockbuster films.
We're kind of reached a number of about 70% that are going to have to shut down by the end of the year without help or without new movies.
And while the movie industry adjusts during the pandemic, their audience says they will return, but with mixed emotions.
I need to go to a theater and watch some movies, or at least one movie. But yeah, I'm gonna be skeptical about it. I'm gonna just have to be more careful about everything.
I'm Kai Beach reporting.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back with more In the Loop, same time and maybe the same place. For now, I'm not going anywhere, but y'all gotta bounce. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right after the outro.